I am Yulin Hswen, Associate Editor of JAMA and JAMA Plus AI, and you are listening to JAMA Plus AI Conversations. Today I'm joined by Viktor Ahlqvist, who is a researcher in the Unit of Integrative Epidemiology, Institute of Environmental Medicine at the Karolinska Institute. Welcome, Viktor.
Thank you so much, Yulin. Thank you for having me.
So I want to talk about your very, very popular study, acetaminophen use during pregnancy and children's risk of autism, ADHD, and intellectual disability, which was published in JAMA. And I want to have a little bit more of a conversation about how AI can enhance these type of studies and what your next type of studies will be. So for our audience, do you want to kind of give us a general background about this study?
Right. So we published a study in JAMA in 2024, me and some colleagues from both Sweden and the US, where we looked at acetaminophen or paracetamol or brand names like Tylenol in pregnancy and neurodevelopmental conditions such as autism, ADHD, and intellectual disability in exposed offspring. The idea really was to extend upon prior smaller scale studies and to be able to account for a lot more of the confounders, so the things that distort the associations, usually the maternal health conditions being the reasons for why acetaminophen is used, or other underlying comorbidities. And there are several ways one can try to adjust for that, but we were able, using the nationwide Swedish registries, to do this in a very effective way on a big scale.
It's interesting because not a lot of these studies are done. Can you also tell us the importance of why we need to conduct automated drug safety surveillance during pregnancy?
So this is a major challenge, and in a lot of pregnant individuals need medications and are treated. So we usually estimate that about 60% use some prescription medication in pregnancy. The problem is that for many medications, we don't know the safety in pregnancy. The reason for that is that pregnant individuals are typically excluded from drug development pipelines for ethical or safety concerns. But what ends up happening then is that the drug comes to market and we don't really know if it's safe to use in pregnancy. And we currently don't do a lot of randomized controlled trials on drug safety in pregnancy. So really what we were left with is observational studies. Now, these observational studies, they're often quite rigorous, but they do take a lot of time to conduct because you need to assemble teams, you need to acquire data, you need to do very sophisticated analysis and deal with all types of problems that may arise from this type of data. So it takes a long time. Usually people estimate that it could take up to 10 years from that drug comes to market until we have some labeling informed by humans. Maybe we could use animal studies, but we know that they don't necessarily translate one-to-one to human pregnancies. So this is a real challenge. And a lot of pregnant individuals and clinicians are really in the dark here because they don't really know if a drug is safe, but you want to treat the maternal condition. On the other hand, you don't want to expose the fetus to unnecessary risk.
Speaking about observational studies and transitioning to how AI can enhance that with your work, you show that these small population level associations can disappear with sibling controls, for instance.
Exactly.
Right? So in this AI era, do you see any risks that predictive models can reintroduce in terms of confounding as an apparent signal?
So I think there's a lot of excitement right now for AI and machine learning and different types of computational approaches within this field, because really what we want to do is shrink these 10 years that it currently takes down to something more usable. I've often said that my dream scenario would be 24 hours, which is ambitious, but it might be possible in years now with the advent of AI and other tools. Really, what we need to do here is not only signal detection through AI, but also causal validation. So we need to be sure that the signal that we see is really due to a harmful effect of the drug. And this is really, really challenging because we have so many confounders, we have so many problems with the data. And AI can help resolve some of these problems, but I think where AI is really going to help us is to automatize these entire processes so that the pipelines become automatic. We will still have to have experts review problems and biases that might arise along the way, but AI will be a cornerstone moving this field forward into automation.
Interesting. So then when you talk about something like AI models using high dimensional data or proxies, how does AI fit when you think about proxies for family factors? And how do you prevent those models from learning based on the data that is inputted in about, for instance, family structure, rather than being able to detect true causal effects?
Yeah, there's a variety of ways one could approach that problem. But if you were to naively deploy AI or machine learning on these vast materials, or this, be it clinician reported safety signals or electronic health records, you would end up with a lot of signals. And the AI would, or machine learners would pick up things that, like you're saying, are just part of the maybe family confounders, such as genetics or health behaviors, etc. And there are classical approaches in statistics and epidemiology and biostatistics to try to resolve this, such as sibling comparisons being one, and negative controls being another. So maybe you look at the paternal consumption of a compound during pregnancy should not lead to a malformation in utero, at least theoretically. You can leverage these types of designs that we know from classical drug safety works really well, but together with machine learners and AI and automated pipelines, you might actually be able to package this whole thing together and get those 10 years down to something more sensible.
Okay, so, your dream scenario of 24 hours, walk me through kind of this case study of how that would work from start to finish in 24 hours, the 24-hour plan, research.
I'm not saying that I have the solution yet, but I think we as a field can get it down there. The current challenges have been that a lot of the data has been fragmented and separated across the globe, but we're now seeing increasing harmonization, common data pipelines, etc., and more technical tools and willingness to share data has been really critical in moving this forward. So with that backdrop, now that we have a lot of data assembled together and harmonized, we can start to play with the idea of deploying, for example, signal detection and validation across several countries. Of course, AI machine learners are really well positioned to lead signal detection type work because they're able to test a variety of inputs and outputs and effectively detect relevant signals. The problem, again, like we were talking about with these signals, is that they will be intertwined with confounders and biases. So you then need to leverage, again, this increasing availability of data to design causal processes like sibling comparisons. We've talked a lot about Mendelian randomization within pregnancy. So leveraging genomics inside pregnancy to do both safety studies, but also drug repurposing. By combining this into common pipelines, we would be able to push that time down.
From the clinical standpoint, and a lot of our audience are clinicians, do you have a patient come in that is pregnant and you're able to have all of their information, and then you're able to better understand their family background, their genetic background, and ultimately within 24 hours, the algorithm is going to be able to put that all together to be able to understand their drug safety profile? Is that kind of the vision that you're seeing?
I think that's a really long-term vision for the field, of course, where people have now started to talk about personalized medicine in pregnancy, which, just a couple of years ago was a total fantasy, but now people are sort of at least sniffing on the idea. I think the first step where we're going to see application of this AI and automation is for regulatory decisions and to inform safety guidelines, so clinical guidelines that will be based on this type of automated signal detection and automated validation of safety concerns. Then ultimately, of course, if data becomes so accessible that we could come down to an individual patient and do counseling in advance of, for example, a congenital malformation. So let's say we have patients that are using a medication which is critically necessary for the underlying condition, but there is some concern of fetal harm should they become pregnant. Then theoretically, you could use these types of machine learners and genetics to create probabilities or risk estimates of this compound actually causing harm for this specific patient. And this is something that has already been explored in neurology quite successfully. Most recently, there was just a paper a couple of days ago now on valproate trying to predict if you're on valproate and you become pregnant, should you be really worried? I don't think we're going to get to the stage where we could say that valproate is going to become safe because it's clearly a teratogen, but we could still do genetic counseling based on the individual patient's profile to say, are they very likely to transfer to the fetus or less likely?
That's really fascinating. Tell me if it's similar in the way, but we have genetic testing, for instance, right? For certain risks for Alzheimer's disease, for instance. And so you understand kind of your profile there. And then similarly, kind of the next step would be the drugs that you're taking. How does that potentially interact with the gene environment and then influence your possible risk for Alzheimer's disease, for instance?
Exactly. And we're seeing the same ideas now in pregnancy sort of emerge, but there's a lot of challenges and a lot of things that have to be resolved until we can actually see this implemented in clinical practice. But it is research that is ongoing and people are exploring this idea. I see a lot of benefit of the type of work also outside the clinical setting in terms of drug development and drug pipelines in industry. So you could theoretically integrate some of these automated signal detection into the drug development pipeline and already pre-market have a sensible idea of whether something could be a human teratogen. Currently, we don't really have that because pregnant individuals are excluded from phase 1, phase 2 trials. And we rely heavily on animal models that don't really do the full job.
So you used sibling comparisons, right, in this study?
In the acetaminophen study.
In the acetaminophen study. I want to bridge into your new article that came out in JAMA, JAMA's Guide to Statistics and Methods, Sibling Comparisons to Account for Confounding in Observational Studies. Can you tell our audience about sibling comparisons? I think it's very unique to the data set that you have, particularly in Sweden, and it's not something that other countries have. Can you explain that a little bit? And then we can kind of lead into some of the questions I had around this article you recently published.
Absolutely. So the idea of sibling comparisons is that really what we want to do in observational studies is find people who are comparable to a large extent, except for the exposure that we're studying. The challenge if you compare unrelated individuals and you try to measure their factors and try to adjust for it through some regression model is that you don't really adjust for everything. And we often just sort of hope that the rest is balanced. But sibling comparisons leverage this idea that, well, we know for a fact that full siblings share on average 50% of their genome and they share a lot of the environment growing up. So what if we compare siblings where one of the siblings was exposed to whatever thing we're interested in and the other sibling was not? And we follow them. And if we can see a difference in outcomes in these siblings, then that provides strong evidence for a causal effect because effectively we have dealt with all of the genetics they share and all the household environment. Of course, full siblings don't share everything, right? You could imagine a study using monozygotic twins that share almost all of their genome. That would be very elegant. The problem for me doing pregnancy research is that usually monozygotic twins share the in utero exposure. They share the womb. So it's not really possible. But we can use full siblings or we can use cousins, for example. But this is a very elegant design. And I'm sorry, Yulin, but I maybe must correct you here that sibling comparisons are now becoming increasingly popular outside the Nordics as well, because we are seeing such massive advances in electronic health records and registry data from around the globe. South Korea, Taiwan are doing fantastic leaps forward, Japan, but also US claims data are now making it possible to do these types of designs even in the US. Even though the Nordics have a very long history of these types of designs, because we have intergenerational linkages, we can easily identify who's related to who. We are seeing them more and more used in many countries now. So one of the case studies that was published in JAMA alongside our guidance of statistical methods looked at acid suppressants, and they used data from Korea.
That's fantastic. I'm glad you said that. I know that this is something that has been a struggle in the US more so, previously without the electronic health records. And your intergenerational data has been always a very strong suit. And this being able to, again, link family relationships and the importance of understanding not just the life course, but previous generations, I think is something that I hope we're going to do more of, not just in the US, but globally. So I'm happy to hear that. How do you think AI fits into this? Can it amplify or mitigate unmeasured confounding? Can it improve the robustness? Where do you see AI kind of fitting into this?
So I think how we build in AI and machine learning into these classical designs come from a sort of different way of approaching problems, because they are typically not data driven, but rather investigator driven, and you sit down and you really map out all the problems. With AI and machine learning, typically we want the data to lead us, which can get us into real trouble because the ghosts that we're seeing in the room, we start believing they're real. So this is a real challenge. We are seeing advances now in what's called causal discovery with AI and these types of machine learning tools, but also targeted maximum likelihood estimation, which has become now a really useful causal machine learner. So there are definitely bridges between them, and we're seeing more and more bridges being built. I think in the future, I'm really excited to see some of these more traditional approaches, such as sibling comparisons, applied to AI problems. So one of the things I know people are working on right now is how can we use these AI tools on the electronic health records to project future health states and estimates risks of future conditions in patients. But could we leverage these classical designs to try to deconfound those, to really understand natural cause of disease causation on a very large scale with electronic health records and with images and with biological markers? This is, of course, very, very exciting, but I think this requires ongoing work and a lot of methods development, but also computational and technical advances, because deploying these complex designs on these high dimensional problems require a lot of thinking, but also computational resources, because they are without a doubt not something you'd run on a standard laptop.
Yes, I think that's the elephant in the room that everyone is ignoring, that it requires a lot of computational power. And that's another conversation about sometimes the worry of whether or not academic institutions can kind of keep up with it, compared to the big tech industry leaders, because the funding they have is so massive, but their teams are also really massive. I think the future is really trying to work together. I think it'll be necessary for the combined systems, both within university, within country, but also connecting globally to be able to really combine that data, which I think that these large companies don't necessarily have access to. So to finish things off, what is your next study then? With all this new AI coming about, what's your next step after this study?
So what we're working on now is trying to lay the foundation to take step towards these automated and data-driven approaches to drug safety. There's a lot of steps we need to take in order to get the 10 years down to 24 hours. So we are segmenting them down and trying to tackle each problem as they come. One of the things we are working the hardest on right now is how to bring in all of this fantastic clinical data that we have in pregnancy. So for example, the high resolution ultrasound data, so you could understand throughout pregnancy when a complication arises, for example, a fetal growth restriction, etc. But there's a lot of technical challenges in how to bring this into a bigger pipeline with electronic health records or with molecular data. So we are working on the technical solutions for that. And hopefully before I enter retirement age, we should have some type of solution.
I think you have a long way to go, Viktor. So hopefully it'll be much, much, much sooner. But your research is so fascinating. Thank you so much for being here. This episode was produced by Shelley Steffens at the JAMA Network. You can find the link to the manuscript in this episode's show notes. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com or search for JAMA Network wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved. including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.